The morning the market died did not begin with fire or screams. It began with silence, the kind of silence that settles right before something sacred breaks. In Amsterdam, a city once fueled by trade, mastery, and the illusion of control, men stood frozen over parchment contracts that had turned to ash in their hands. No war, no plague, just a flower, and a price that finally collapsed under its own impossible weight. By noon, the panic had already metastasized. Houses once leveraged to buy bulbs were being sold for a fraction of their worth. Merchants who had bragged about fortunes made overnight were now avoiding mirrors, terrified to meet the eyes of the fools they had become. Brokers slammed doors, shutters dropped, and the auction halls, once theaters of feverish bidding, turned into morgues of broken promises. Every street corner echoed with the same question: how could a flower destroy us? But the truth sat deeper, darker. Tulips had become more than flowers. They had become tickets to ascendancy, symbols of power wrapped in delicate petals. And when people believed the petals could make them rich, they offered everything: savings, ships, dowries, futures unborn. They believed because everyone else believed, and when belief is traded like currency, collapse becomes inevitable. The final hour of the mania looked like a slow-motion disaster. Contracts were still being waved in the air, worthless now, but held tightly as if clinging could reverse time. A man who had borrowed against his home for a single rare bulb collapsed to his knees outside a tavern, the parchment fluttering from his fingers like a dying leaf. Inside, others argued, pleaded, screamed. But there was no one left to buy, no one left to save them. The ladder had been pulled up long before the crowd realized they were climbing a rope made of smoke. As night fell, Amsterdam was unrecognizable. Darkness crept through alleyways heavy with regret. Families locked themselves indoors, hiding from creditors and truth alike. The air itself felt bruised, thick with disbelief, weighted by a collective shame no one dared name. The world's most sophisticated market had been undone not by invasion or disaster, but by desire. And beneath that desire was a simple, brutal revelation. When value becomes faith, faith becomes a weapon. Tulips didn't destroy the Dutch Republic. People did. Because they believed they had found a shortcut to wealth. Because they trusted the crowd more than reality. Because they forgot that every ascent has a price, and every mania ends the same way, with a fall that feels like the end of the world. Yet even in that ruin, a whisper lingered in the cold, fractured air. A warning, a curse, a prophecy. This won't be the last time. Patterns don't shout, they whisper, quiet, consistent, merciless. And when you look at Tulip Mania not as a bizarre footnote in financial history, but as the first clear imprint of human economic behavior, you start to see something unsettling. The mathematics of madness. A sequence, a loop, a formula so simple and so terrifying that once you see it, you can't unsee it. It begins with scarcity, not real scarcity, perceived scarcity. The tulip was rare, yes, but it was the story of rarity that ignited the spark. A flower rumored to be impossible to cultivate, a color pattern whispered to exist in only a handful of bulbs. Suddenly, people weren't buying tulips. They were buying exclusivity, identity, status, and the human mind, wired for survival in a world of limited resources, reacts predictably. If it's scarce, it must be valuable. Then comes frenzy. Frenzy is not chaos, it's synchronized delusion. Amsterdam merchants, sailors, craftsmen, ordinary people, watched as their neighbors transformed into overnight aristocrats simply by owning a bulb. And the rule of three took hold. Someone you know made money. Someone like you made money. Someone dumber than you made money. That's when the crowd stops thinking and starts running. Prices detach from reality. Rumors become facts. Facts become gospel. The market becomes a mirror reflecting only desire. The third phase is the one that seals the fate of every bubble: leverage. It's the point where belief becomes debt. People don't just buy, they borrow. They mortgage their homes, their land, their futures. Banks and brokers step in, offering credit lines and complex contracts that promise infinite upside and no downside. The Dutch invented early derivatives, futures, options, long before Wall Street gave them elegant names. Leverage amplifies gains, but it multiplies losses. And once leverage enters the bloodstream, collapse is guaranteed. And finally, inevitably, comes the fall. Collapse is never caused by a single event. It's a chain reaction, a silent unraveling of trust. One missed payment, one failed auction, one rumor that a certain bulb may not be as rare as claimed. The crowd that once surged upward in unison now stampedes downward, trampling everything it built. The same voices that shouted "buy" now whisper "get out." But exits shrink when everyone runs at once. Liquidity evaporates, prices implode, and the dream becomes a grave. This pattern, scarcity, frenzy, leverage, collapse, is not unique to tulips. It appears everywhere, like a watermark on human history. The South Sea bubble followed it with eerie precision. The 1929 crash echoed it with brutal clarity. Dot-com investors chanted the same delusion. This time is different. Housing bubbles across continents repeated the ritual with tragic consistency. Cryptomanias danced along the same curve, dressed in digital clothing, but powered by identical psychology. The frightening truth is that the pattern is not financial, it's biological. It's embedded in the neural architecture of reward, fear, imitation, and hope. We chase scarcity because evolution rewarded us for doing so. We join frenzies because fitting into the tribe meant survival. We take leverage because risk once meant catching prey, not losing portfolios. And we collapse because panic is contagious, faster than reason, older than logic. Tulip Mania wasn't a mistake. It was a blueprint, a template encoded into the human operating system. A mathematical script we reenact century after century, each time believing we've outgrown it, each time proving that we haven't. There's a reason the bubble curve looks the same whether the asset is a flower, a stock, a house, or a JPEG. The asset doesn't matter, the people do. And people change technology, change markets, change laws, but they do not change themselves. The first bubble didn't end in the 1630s. It never ended at all. It simply evolved, disguising itself in new colors, new narratives, new illusions. Because the real bubble is not in the market, it's in the mind. And that mind keeps whispering the same four-step prophecy again and again, waiting for the next crowd to listen. We like to believe we've escaped the past, that tulips were a primitive mistake made by simpler minds in a slower world. But walk through any modern city, scroll any financial feed, step into any trading forum, and you'll feel it. The same electricity, the same hunger, the same delusion. We're growing new tulips, just bigger, faster, digital. Today's markets don't trade flowers, they trade fantasies. A meme stock rockets 300% in a week because a swarm decides it should. An NFT of a pixelated face sells for more than a house because rarity is now defined by a line of code. AI startups raise billions on promises no one can verify, but everyone wants to believe. The assets have changed, the psychology hasn't. The petals are gone, but the fever remains. Look closely at the modern landscape, and you'll see the same three-phase rhythm beating underneath the noise. Scarcity? We call it limited supply. Exclusive mint, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Frenzy? We call it momentum, community, viral attention. Leverage? We call it options trading, buy now, pay later, zero-interest credit, leverage tokens. Collapse? We call it market corrections, liquidation cascades, transient volatility. The vocabulary evolved, the vulnerability didn't. In the 17th century, people met in smoky taverns to gossip about bulbs. Today, we gather in Discord servers, Reddit threads, TikTok tips, Telegram channels. Back then, a rumor had to travel by word of mouth. Now it can circle the planet in seconds, dressed as breaking alpha or inside knowledge. Frenzy has become global, instantaneous, algorithmic. Tulip Mania didn't disappear, it was upgraded. Even our technologies have become new gardens for old illusions. Crypto promised decentralization, but created a mirror of the same greed and leverage that once fueled Dutch auctions. Meme stocks promised rebellion, but turned into coordinated stampedes indistinguishable from tulip crowds. AI hype promises a new future, but investors chase it with the same blind fervor they once reserved for flowers that bloomed for a few days a year. And housing? Housing is tulips with walls. Cities inflate like balloons, Sydney, Vancouver, New York, until entire generations are priced out, convinced the bubble is actually a ladder. Debt becomes a birthright. Mortgages stretch into lifetimes. A home stops being shelter and becomes a speculative weapon, traded upward until someone, somewhere, whispers the fatal phrase, "What if prices stop rising?" Even consumer behavior has become a tulip field. Buy now, pay later apps encourage people to leverage their futures for shoes, phones, groceries. Households stack invisible liabilities the same way Dutch traders stacked bulb contracts. When enough people borrow against tomorrow, tomorrow becomes a trap. Walk through the digital world and it becomes impossible not to notice the resemblance. The same irrational assent, the same euphoric certainty, the same belief that this time is different, the same collective blindness that convinces ordinary people they've finally outsmarted the system right before the system resets. The truth is uncomfortable. We aren't witnessing new phenomena. We are replaying old scripts. What looks modern is ancient. What feels innovative is recycled. What promises liberation often hides the same invisible chains. History isn't repeating, it's rhyming with sharper edges. Because today's tulips don't bloom in gardens. They bloom on screens, in spreadsheets, in tokens, in data centers, in earnings calls. They bloom wherever hope can be monetized and fear can be weaponized. They bloom wherever someone whispers about a shortcut, a secret, a chance to escape gravity. The Dutch lost fortunes chasing rare petals. We lose fortunes chasing rare pixels, rare narratives, rare chances to feel like we're one step ahead of everyone else. And beneath it all lies a chilling parallel. People back then didn't think they were in a bubble. Neither do we. The world may have changed, but the mind behind the mania, the longing, the envy, the panic, the imitation, remains untouched. We aren't just repeating history, we're accelerating it. Every chart you see today is a tulip stem in disguise. Every hype cycle is a garden that will one day wilt. And every time the world thinks it has finally matured, a new field of digital petals begins to glow, inviting us to pick them, to chase them, to worship them, until they collapse under the weight of our belief. The tulips are still here, we just stopped recognizing them. There is a comforting lie we tell ourselves, that bubbles emerge from chaos, from chance, from the collective foolishness of ordinary people. But the deeper you look into Tulip Mania, the more that lie dissolves. Because behind every frenzy, every spike, every rumor, every unstoppable market, there are architects. And their fingerprints stretch from 17th century Amsterdam straight into the boardrooms and server farms of today. In the tulip era, these architects wore simple titles: brokers, merchants, guild officials. But their power was anything but simple. They controlled the taverns where auctions were hosted, the ledgers where prices were recorded, the contracts that defined ownership. They understood something the average carpenter or sailor didn't: that belief could be sculpted, engineered, weaponized. And they wielded that knowledge like a blade. When bulbs were scarce, they whispered promises of future abundance. When prices soared, they assured buyers the climb had only begun. When doubts surfaced, they drowned them out with stories of newly wealthy neighbors. And when the first cracks appeared, they quietly slipped out the back door, leaving the crowd to choke on the dust of collapse. These were not victims of mania. They were the engineers of it. Even the Dutch Republic's early financial institutions played their part. Banks extended credit without restraint, enabling ordinary families to borrow far beyond their means. Bartering evolved into complex futures contracts, agreements that allowed traders to speculate on bulbs they had never even seen. It was innovation, but innovation sharpened into extraction. The machinery of the market wasn't malfunctioning. It was functioning exactly as designed. Fast forward 4 centuries, and the engineers have upgraded their tools. Modern brokers use interfaces engineered to trigger impulsive trades, bright colors, instant alerts, frictionless buying. Investment banks release research that conveniently aligns with their positions. Hedge funds deploy algorithms that manipulate momentum, amplifying trends before retail traders even know what's happening. Media outlets pump narratives not because they're true, but because they're viral. Influencers, analysts, and self-appointed gurus flood feeds with predictions designed to stir emotion rather than insight. And governments, whether through stimulus, interest rates, or regulatory blind spots, play the same silent role that guild councils once played, enabling the mania, benefiting from the mania, and stepping aside when the reckoning comes. Every bubble has its cast of characters, the narrative builders, shaping the story, accelerating the dream. The market makers, controlling liquidity, nudging prices, exploiting panic. The credit providers, offering leverage to the masses while hedging their own risk. The insiders, selling quietly while the crowd buys loudly. The institutions, declaring the economy strong until the day it craters. They operate in shadows made of data instead of candlelight, but the blueprint is unchanged. The tulip brokers nudged a flower into becoming a fortune. Today's elites nudge markets into becoming machines that harvest attention, savings, hope. Whenever a bubble inflates, the public sees opportunity, but the architects see something else, a transfer, wealth moving upward, risk moving downward, confusion flowing outward. And once the bubble reaches its peak, once the public is at maximum exposure and minimum clarity, the engineers step back. They reduce positions, hedge, short, withdraw. They exit the burning building through doors the rest of us never knew existed. Then, when the collapse hits, when portfolios implode and debts metastasize, they re-enter the ashes with fresh capital. They buy the ruins. They rebuild the narrative. They wait for the next cycle. Because the next bubble is not an accident, it is a revenue stream. The tulip brokers weren't naive. Wall Street isn't naive. Central banks aren't naive. Tech giants, hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, none of them are naive. The only naive ones are the crowds who still believe that bubbles just happen. Behind every frenzy in history is the same silent truth. Someone benefits from the chaos. Someone pulls the strings. Someone knows before you do. Tulip Mania didn't reveal human stupidity. It revealed a hierarchy. The few who design the dream, the many who fall for it, and the machines, old or modern, that ensure the dream always ends the same way. Not because it must, but because they want it to. Cycles don't end, they shed skin. What happened in Amsterdam almost 4 centuries ago wasn't the birth of a single bubble. It was the unveiling of a pattern that would stalk humanity forever. But while the pattern is eternal, our fate inside it isn't. Tulips bloom, wilt, and bloom again, but people can choose whether to step back into the field. The inevitability of bubbles is not a curse, it's a mirror. And mirrors don't control us, they expose us. Because beneath every mania lies a choice, quiet but profound. Follow the crowd or see the crowd for what it is. Join the fever or recognize the symptoms. Become a believer or become a witness. The Dutch merchants who resisted the frenzy weren't prophets. They were disciplined. They understood a truth that feels almost subversive in an age of constant temptation. Not every opportunity is meant for you. They watched their neighbors get rich. They endured the ache of missing out. They suffered the whispers of being too cautious, too slow, too boring. But when the collapse came, they were the ones still standing. Not richer, just intact. And intact is the one currency every bubble tries to steal. Today, in a world built on algorithms designed to trigger desire, Discipline feels like rebellion. When every feed is a highlight reel of fast money, when every chart looks like a rocket waiting to launch, when every voice screams that hesitation is failure, choosing patience becomes a kind of moral defiance. The truth is simple, brutal, liberating. You cannot stop the bubble, but you can stop yourself from becoming its fuel. It starts with perspective, a willingness to step outside the story, to question the promises, to ask the forbidden question, who profits if I believe this? It continues with boundaries, avoiding leverage unless you can afford the loss, refusing to chase assets simply because others are running faster, treating hype as a warning, not an invitation. And it's sustained by humility, an acknowledgement that markets do not reward arrogance, that risk is a shadow that never leaves, that survival is a strategy, not an accident. Escaping the tulip trap doesn't mean withdrawing from the world. It means engaging with it without surrendering to the illusions that power it. It means holding your ground when the crowd surges. It means recognizing that wealth built steadily outlives wealth built suddenly. It means remembering that every market cycle ends with two groups, those who believed too much and those who believed just enough to protect themselves. The elites, the architects, the engineers of bubbles, they rely on a predictable pattern, that the masses will forget, that history will fade, that greed will outrun memory. But memory can be sharpened, and awareness can be armor. The first bubble may have written the script, but you don't have to play your assigned role. You can step out of the narrative. You can walk past the glowing fields of digital tulips. You can choose clarity over euphoria, caution over frenzy, independence over imitation. And when the next bubble forms, and it will, you can watch it rise with steady breath, knowing the cycle is inevitable, but your participation is not. History will keep looping, markets will keep swelling, crowds will keep running, but a few will walk, a few will see, a few will remain untouched by the stampede, because the cycle doesn't break, but you can.